Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for being here with us and for having accepted our webinar that I think would be of your interest. We would like to inform you as the COVID-19 is the main worldwide topic at the moment. We have invited a few experts whom will explain some legal input and warnings for the transport and logistics sector. Matteo from MPL Care Insurance will also give you some useful information regarding insurances. After their explanations, please feel free to click on Q&A button. It is a section that will allow you to ask your questions on live. I thank you very much, and we wish to all of you a very nice vision.
Okay. Good morning, good day, or good evening, everyone, depending on your time zone. Welcome to this webinar, and I am pleased to see that so many of you have joined us. My name is Matteo Albertini, and I am Care Insurance representative for Marco Polo Line. I may be a familiar face for some of you, as we met several times during MPL conferences. We are the network's official insurance broker and currently serve many members in different countries. I am pleased to be joined by Sophie in offering you this interesting opportunity. We have worked together with the Italian law firm LCA in order to provide you some guidelines on the current international situations related to COVID-19, concerning logistics, of course. We know it's quite a mayhem out there and clarity is key. And I'm sure you can be sure that today our lawyers friends will provide some useful information, and they have been kind enough to invite other colleagues of theirs from different countries in order to provide you with an as comprehensive panel as possible. And I am pleased now to introduce Davide Magnolia from LCA's law firm, who will present his law firms and colleagues and today's topics. And if you have any questions, as Sophie just said, you can use the sidebar and we will select some of these questions at the end of the webinar. And of course, you can still contact us after today's webinar on our email address. And at the end of the lawyer's presentation, I will share with you a few slides on insurance matters. And so you can have the full pictures on current issues. And Davide, over to you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Davide Magnolia, and I run transportation, shipping, and logistics department at LCA Studio Legale. Let me give you some background information on LCA Studio Legale. I promise I will keep it short and sweet. LCA is an independent full-service law firm with over 150 professionals, specializing in all main areas of commercial, corporate, and business law. We have a dedicated transportation, shipping, and logistics team with 10 lawyers, and we mainly assist forwarding agents, carriers, maritime agencies, and logistics operators, giving them daily legal advice in loss prevention, in managing damages and casualties, and in drafting contracts related to goods and raw materials. Our goal is to provide our client, whether a startup or a medium-sized business or a listed multinational company, with tailor-made, responsive, and high-quality legal service. We have our headquarters in Milan, with local offices in Genoa, Treviso, and Dubai. We can cover main countries and ports worldwide through our network. The firm operates at both a national and international level. In light of our international approach, we have proposed this webinar to answer a few simple questions. How coronavirus epidemic has changed shipping, logistics, and transportation markets? How freight forwarding industry is dealing with this crazy and unusual situation? What kind of measures have been taken by states, and are they enough? Today, we will provide you with a look at Italy, UK, China, and hopefully US, with the hope to give some hints to cope with the situation and overcome these hard times. To wrap up, once Albert Einstein said, "Learn from yesterday, live for today, and hope for tomorrow." The ambitious purpose of this webinar is to learn from today, so to live a hopeful tomorrow. Let's get the ball rolling, and I give the floor to my fellow colleague, Giacomo Falsetta, who will give you his two cents from the Italian perspective. Thank you very much.
Good day, everybody, and thank you for being connected. My name is Giacomo Falsetta, and I'm a shipping lawyer at LCA Studio Legale. The Italian government, I will speak about the Italian situation regarding this COVID outbreak. The Italian government took several measures to face the COVID outbreak progressively. The first provision was dated 23rd of February, and the last one was issued on 8th of April. In the middle, several decrees of the Prime Minister and legislative decrees were adopted. I will briefly answer to the questions indicated in the invitation to the present webinar, describing the current situation in Italy. The first one is concerning the impact of the COVID outbreak on the logistics sector. In order to limit the outbreak, the Italian government took restrictive measures for the operativity of all the companies belonging to those sectors that were not considered as strictly essential in the quarantine period. The transport and logistic industry is one of the few that were not interested by the lockdown provisions, being considered as a crucial activity for granting the supply of goods and healthcare products. Nonetheless, the COVID outbreak had a strong impact on the logistics sector. The effects of the outbreak were remarkable, especially for the maritime sector. In fact, on the one hand, alternative operative solutions had to be taken by the terminal operators to allow the access to their premises in order to grant the safety of all the workers involved in the process. Moreover, the goods arrived at the ports were not picked up since the warehouses of the consignees were closed. As a consequence, many containers laid down at the terminal premises, accruing several port storages and D&Ds, putting freight forwarders in the difficult situation to anticipate costs for picking up the containers once the delivery will be possible. To find a partial remedy to such situation, with the last provision, that is the decree of the Prime Minister dated 8th of April, which still did not provide for the reopening of the productive activities, the government allowed the companies to open their warehouses to make the flow of the goods restart. Passing to the second question about the force majeure. Generally speaking, under Italian law, we have not a clear definition of what a force majeure is. In other words, there is no chance to state whether the force majeure applies or not before considering the specific case. The concept of force majeure is expressed in the Italian Civil Code through two different principles. The intervened impossibility to perform the obligation for a cause that is outside the control of the debtor, and the excessive onerousness. When the obligation becomes too expensive for an intervened cost, the debtor is not liable for its misperformance. In both the cases, such cause shall be unpredictable and inevitable to grant the force majeure. Going into the straight answer to the question, according to Italian case law, the cause for a force majeure could be represented by a decision of the authority. So, theoretically, the decrees issued by the government are fit to represent a grounded cause of force majeure. Nonetheless, as said, in order to understand whether force majeure applies, we have to go into the details of each single case. What we can assume is that force majeure will be easier to be applied for those companies that were forced by the government to close down. although many aspects shall be considered in each single case. For example, it is unlikely that such companies could not be held liable if the obligation should have been performed before the lockdown provision. So it is also important the time when the obligation had to be performed. On the other hand, it is not automatic that for those companies remained open, the force majeure will not apply. For example, the road carriers that have no possibility to deliver the goods to the consignees, since they're not operative and they couldn't get the delivery, most likely cannot be considered liable for not performing such delivery. So each single case needs to be investigated before stating whether a force majeure cause applies or not, even in those cases where the defaulting company was forced to closure by the government. The third question is about the limit or obstacles to the import-export operation by the government. Actually, the Italian government did not limit or obstacle the import-export operations. On the contrary, considering the cash flow problems of the customs agent and of the freight forwarders in paying the customs duties, the government allowed them to postpone the payment of the duties for additional 30 days. Moreover, the government took measures to lower the local duties due for medical equipment. The only measure that can be considered as a limitation to the exportation is the decision by some local authority to seize some cargo represented by healthcare products, such as masks, overalls, or gloves, that should have been exported to third countries. Such measures have been taken recently at the port of Ancona, for example, with a cargo of life support machines. The reason is that Italy is facing a very difficult situation and that any medical equipment is needed to protect the public health. Passing to the fourth question about the economic assistance provided by the government, we can say that the Italian government took different economic measures to help all the companies to overcome this crisis. Apart from some provisions lowering the tax burden upon them, the government tried to help them to have immediate cash. The decree number 23 dated 8th of April, the last one that was taken by the government, provides for several measures to the benefit of any company asking for loans to banks. The Italian government, in fact, decided to guarantee the banks issuing financing to companies in the measure of 100% for loans requests up to 25,000 euros, and in the measure of 90% for higher amounts. Such guarantee is issued for any debtor, excluding only those that have been classified as having impaired loans before the 30th of January. There is now a debate in Italy since such potential cash injection is not freely accessible by the companies, being conditioned to the approval by the banks. Such mechanism makes this measure ineffective in the short period, and the companies are now suffering for the lack of cash flow. Finally, the last question is about what the freight forwarders should be careful of while performing their obligation of the COVID-19 emergency. In Italy, freight forwarders are facing two main problems, the cash flow and the D&Ds. The cash flow is a huge problem for any company at the moment, but especially for freight forwarders who shall pay for the customs duties and for the costs connected to the cargo towards two counterparts that do not accept postponement of the payments, that are the Italian state and the shipping lines. As I have already told you about, the Italian government granted a further 30 days postponement of the payment of the customs duties, but such measure does not seem to be sufficient to actually help the operators to face the cash flow problems. On the other hand, in fact, the clients are in a very bad economic position since their factories have been closed down. And on the other hand, the access to loans is not immediate. So freight forwarder will have probably some problem in cashing their credits from them. The same problem of the cash flow reflects also upon the acquiring of D&Ds. No one could have predicted that the situation would have been the present one when the goods left the respective port of departure, and thus no one was prepared to the accruing of further costs at the port of destination. Moreover, the attitude of the shipping lines is not very collaborative so far, at least in Italy. They are not granting any discount on the D&Ds, and they are even applying a peak season surcharge. In this situation, what we are suggesting to our client is to pay in order to pick up the container, but reserving the right to get reimbursement of such costs accrued because of a force majeure cause. Unfortunately, except deciding to start a special proceedings to obtain or to try to obtain the delivery of the goods without paying the D&Ds, the only solution at the moment that allows the freight forwarders to avoid the D&Ds to accrue for a long time is to pay what required by the shipping line. Then an ordinary proceedings shall be started, and hopefully the force majeure cause shall be proved to apply to the single case. This is generally speaking, the situation in Italy, and now I leave the floor to Kevin Cooper that will describe us the situation under a UK perspective. Thank you very much for this.
Grazie. Everybody can hear me as a start? Any nods? Great. Hello from sunny England, unusually sunny England, and thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak for about 10 minutes on the 5 questions that have been asked from the English perspective, both that of the United Kingdom and also the English law perspective. Who am I? I'm Kevin Cooper. I'm a partner at MFB Solicitors in London. We are a specialist boutique law firm dealing with international trade, shipping and insurance. I've got some 20 years experience working in those fields. And indeed have received a fair number of instructions, as you'd expect, recently in relation to issues arising from COVID-19. I'm going to run through the 5 questions that have been put to us. And the first one was, what is the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak on the logistics sector in your country? Well, I suspect that a lot of the challenges will be the same across the countries that are represented by the various speakers during the course of this webinar. But of course, meeting contractual obligations in time as a result of the increasing number of organisations having to close temporarily is of course having a major impact. I read this morning that even though China has now reopened, production is still only about between 20 and 40% of what it was before the COVID-19 outbreak started. And of course, with most companies now having lean supply chains, any sort of interruption, particularly a large disruption of the type that we've got at the moment, can mean that manufacturing processes are impaired by a lack of raw materials or of components. Traffic restrictions, of course, there's been closure of the borders within Europe, although as with Italy, as I understand it, international trade, movement of freight is an essential service. People involved in that activity in the UK are key workers, which gives them certain advantages during the lockdown here in the United Kingdom. But of course, even though they should be exempt from the border controls that have been placed within the European Union, there will be delays as a result, and as we all know, delays cost money. Here we have something of a shortage of personal protective equipment, PPE, that goes across all sectors, including our health service, but also for people involved in the logistics sector as well. I think we may well be quite behind a lot of the other European countries in that. We've seen scams started as a result of COVID-19, import of medical products or PPE which are not compliant with current regulations, phishing emails trying to affect businesses. I think we may all have read recently about MSC's problems with its activities in Switzerland with what may be or may not be a COVID related attack. There are issues about receivers being closed, goods being left in warehouses, additional costs that result from that. This isn't the place to go into who's going to bear those costs. Often it will depend on which Incoterms apply, but for example, if goods are shipped CPT, that may end up being the shipper's responsibility at the end of the day if the receiver is unable or unwilling to take the goods. The UK currently has a quarantine period of 14 days for crew, but that's not really an issue as in most cases, as the voyage is likely to take more than 14 days from most countries from which we import goods. Whilst I'm talking about the impact of the outbreak on the logistics sector, I'm also going to talk about the impact on very briefly, the impact on the legal sector, because of course quite a few international shipping contracts are subject to English law and English court jurisdiction or arbitration. I'm pleased and somewhat surprised, in fact, to be able to say that courts and arbitrators in this jurisdiction have embraced the restrictions that have been imposed on us through the social distancing measures that we've all been required to take. In fact, last week I attended virtually a Court of Appeal hearing where the Lords Justices of Appeal did their very best to embrace the new technology and in fact managed to achieve it. And it was possible also for it to be a public hearing. So the message from the courts here, coming down from the very top of the judiciary, and also from arbitration tribunals as well, is it's business as usual as much as possible. Right, the second question was, are the COVID-19 measures considered force majeure in national and international contracts according to your legal system? Right, well, I could talk for hours on this subject, but I'm not going to, you'll be pleased to hear. I will try to restrict myself to minutes. Force majeure is not an English law concept. It's, as the name would suggest, it's a European construct. That said, when force majeure appears in a contract that is subject to English law, then the courts will give effect to it. And there is quite a strong body of English case law about what force majeure means. But really, it all boils down to two simple things. The first is, what does the wording say? Because there's no general principle of force majeure. It can only be incorporated into a contract through express wording. So you need to look very, very carefully at how it is defined, what its implications are, and also whatever notice periods are contractually required. The second thing that you need to think about when looking at force majeure is, what is the actual impact of COVID-19 on the performance of the contract, and see whether the actual implications for you fall within that definition. It's not enough for your contract simply to become a worse deal for you. It has to be something effectively, in most cases, and it will depend on the exact wording, but in most cases that makes it impossible. And you will be required, if you are going to rely on a force majeure clause, to mitigate it just as much as possible. Now, the other English law principle to be aware of is one called frustration. And again, I'm not going to go into detail, but that is the English law equivalent of force majeure. So if you don't have a force majeure clause, you could perhaps rely on frustration, but it's very rare for the English courts or arbitration tribunals to accept that a contract is frustrated. It has to be an intervening event that goes to the root of the contract that makes it almost incapable of being performed in the manner originally intended. And the other point about frustration is that it's all or nothing. If a contract is frustrated, it is ended. whereas the purpose of a lot of force majeure clauses actually is to avoid, under English law at least, is to avoid the impact of frustration simply ending the contract and to provide a mechanism whereby the parties can react to the unforeseen situation that falls within the force majeure clause. The third question I can take very quickly: did your government limit or obstacle the import or export operations? Well, no. In fact, as I said, it's an essential service. People working in import and export and trade generally are key workers, and in fact, the government is trying to do what it can to encourage the continuance of trade. That said, the cost of trading, as I understand it, has gone up very considerably since the crisis hit. I think actually costs at the moment of import and export are running at something like 30% above what they were this time last year. The only restriction that we've been able to find at the moment is on parallel export of medicines, and there's some 80 medicines, including paracetamol, insulin, that have been restricted. Now, parallel exporting is when drugs are bought in for use within, in our case, this country's health service, but in fact sold on at a profit. That has been prevented for obvious reasons, but otherwise there has been no restriction, and fine words have been said about supporting global trade in the UK. The extent to which those will be honoured when there are so many demands on the government's budget has yet to be seen. Question 4. Have logistic operators been provided with economic assistance to help them to overcome this difficult situation? Well, no, they haven't been singled out for particular assistance, but the government has announced a raft of measures, unprecedentedly generous, in fact, raft of measures to support businesses. Generally, we have a furloughing system here, a job retention scheme whereby people can be placed on furlough, and the government will pay a large part of, up to a certain cap, their salaries. There are various tax changes that have been made, deferring requirements to pay VAT, for example, and also with the tax authorities giving a time to pay scheme to help companies. Self-employees as well have an income support scheme. There is a statutory sick pay relief package for those whose workers are affected by it, an improved one. Small business grants for smaller companies, and a business interruption loan scheme to support long-term viable businesses who may need to respond to cash flow pressures by seeking additional finance, as well as a new lending facility from the Bank of England, our central bank, to help support liquidity amongst larger firms, helping them bridge coronavirus disruption to their cash flow through loans. The fifth question that I have been asked to deal with was what should freight forwarders be careful of while performing their obligations during COVID-19? Again, I repeat what's already been said by Giacomo. A lot of what the various speakers will have to say will mirror one another, but do look very carefully at contractual obligations, and if you think you might be relying on a force majeure clause, take a very careful look at exactly what it says, as I said before. Communication is as important now as it ever has been. There has been disruption, but communicate clearly with clients on the potentiality for delays to occur. It will often be impossible to offer a guaranteed delivery date as the situation is changing so quickly. So be transparent and open with clients regarding the ability to get goods to the intended destination, and also I'd suggest deal with head-on the potential additional costs due to storage issues, the possibility that the receiver might not be there to accept the goods. Insurance, where it's available at an acceptable premium, might well be considered to protect against losses, although it's not common to be able to take out insurance in respect of delay, particularly in the current circumstances. And of course, in this time when a lot of companies are going to be facing severe financial difficulties, you really do need to look very carefully at your accounts receivable, your payment terms, in order to avoid credit issues arising as a result of the pandemic. And for any new business that you enter into now, check very carefully your contracts, check very carefully any terms and conditions, and importantly, make sure that any standard terms and conditions are incorporated into your contractual arrangements with anyone else that you are dealing with. So the transport and logistics industry generally are problem solvers, and they are finding alternative ways to deal with the current issues that we are all facing. Of course, alternative ways of dealing with these issues means that they're likely to be more expensive. Otherwise, they would have been used before. And so it's important that everybody understands that and that everybody cooperates in order to keep the world moving. So that is all that I had to say, and I understand that it'll be Luana who will be speaking next. Thank you very much.
My name is Luana Penigel, and I work for LCA law firm. I take care of I'm in charge of the China issues in LCA law firm. So I'm going to give you some bullet points about the current China situation. So as we all know, the situation in China is currently stabilizing, and there's a decrease in new COVID-19 cases reported. Therefore, now efforts of the government are turned to reviving the economy. As for now, all the airports are operating as usual, even if international passenger flights and freighters are significantly reduced. Also, all tracking services and all the ports are operating as usual, even if there are many blank sailings. But also in China, as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, transport operators had to experience huge shortfalls in their incomes and face severe threats to their businesses. And to tackle these challenges, Chinese authorities implemented a number of measures. So I'm going to mention some of these measures to let you understand what has been done in China, what's going on. So to start, for example, local authorities, and I mean authorities and municipal and provincial level, should give subsidies to transport and logistic enterprises that have performed emergency transportation tasks during the epidemic control and prevention period. Also, from 23 January to 30 June 2020, the central government should provide subsidies to Chinese and international airlines that operate international flights in and out of China, excluding Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. For sectors that have been severely affected by COVID-19, such as logistics, tourism, and transportation, especially for small and micro enterprises, loans should be not refused, reduced, or limited. For those enterprises that have troubles to making payment, loan extension or renewal should be granted, and they should enjoy lower lending rates. And also they may apply for additional medium and long-term loans. The government, the Chinese government, also introduced some financing support, especially for enterprises that provide production, transport, and logistics services of essential supplies, including premium financial services at preferential rates, and assisting enterprises to resume and expand their production capacity. Also, insurance companies are required to reserve discounts, delays, and special treatment to logistics and transportation companies. Again, from 17 February 2020 until the end of the prudential and control period, all toll routes across the country should be free for any kind of vehicle. So no stops, no check-in at any place all around China. Also, from 1st January 2020, the civil aviation development funds that should be paid by all airlines should be waived until the end of the epidemic. From 1st March to 30 June 2020, the port construction fees for imported and exported goods should be exempted, and cargo fees and port facility fees that are set by the government should be reduced by 20%. These are just a few of the measures that have been introduced by the Chinese government to help the logistic and transportation sector after the epidemic. Now, I guess my time is over already, therefore I leave room to the next speaker, that I guess should be Matteo.
Hello again. Let me share my presentation with you. So, before I start, just wanted to remind you the fact that there is the possibility to share some questions with us. So if you can click on the question and answer button, which is just on the left of the ending button, you can write your own questions so that we can reply to these at the end of the webinar. So, of course, my focus today is the insurance side. Just a couple of words about CARE. For those of you who may not yet be familiar with us, we are the official international insurance broker of the MPL network, based in Italy, but with our international network. We specialize in marine risk, so most of our clients are freight forwarders. And that's why the opportunity has arisen between us and MPL to cooperate, and with other highly technical specialties, from project cargo to contractual insurance, from business travel to cyber to pollution and other things. So we have been working with MPL for 4 years now, taking part regularly to their conferences and events, and we do insure a good number of their members, and assisting them wherever we can. And our activity is mostly focused on service. So from the broking side, meaning how we negotiate the best terms for you, to the claims when something happens, contractual review, training in a very similar way and a very similar fashion to the one that we are doing today. So it's a comprehensive service that we provide to companies and freight forwarders, logistics companies in particular, in order to help you get through the very difficult world of insurance. I will deal with 4 different types of insurance and how you can use them or what's happening with them concerning the recent COVID-19 spread. And I will start, of course, with marine insurance. As we have listened from the other speakers today, of course, it's a very complicated situation now, but on a positive note, I would say, we are finally seeing that logistics is being recognized as a very important sector. So if you look at which airplanes are flying right now, it's certainly not passenger planes, but it's mostly cargo planes. So that means that the industry is under tremendous pressure and is working around the clock to make sure that vital provisions are sent to clients and to different from one country to another. But of course, it's a difficult situation, and there are some risks which are, in this situation. So particularly this may depend on the type of cargo. So for example, high value cargo is a greater risk, especially while in storage. There have been some delays and some postponements of some shipments. So precious cargo may now be stored at warehouses worldwide. And this, of course, is an additional risk. Or they may be stored in some places where they are not intended to be, or places where they do not have enough safety measures to store these goods. So it's a very difficult situation, and high value cargo is at this moment at greater risk. Perishables are also subject to greater risk in this period, especially because of the storage, mandatory storage that has been implemented across the globe. So we have containers that are being stored at ports or in warehouses, and of course, whenever you have temperature controlled containers, it can be a problem if there is a breakdown or if there is not enough power to power up these refrigerators. So be especially careful when you are shipping perishables at this critical time, because in order to prevent delays and so on. The insurance side can be useful in this case, of course, because in case of perishables, we have some dedicated clause that can cover this type of goods, but make sure to check your time deductibles, because in the Institute frozen food clauses, for example, you have a 24 hours breakdown clause, meaning that for the first 24 hours, in most policies, there won't be any cover if the refrigerator breaks down and the goods, the perishables goods, will get spoiled. Pharma and food are also, of course, key commodities. As of now, they are being prioritized over with respect to other type of commodities, but routing in this case is to be checked in advance in order to prevent as much as possible any delays, or to have these goods stuck at ports, or maybe not loaded on a ship and on the following one. And especially with pharma, these can also be temperature controlled, and in case of delays, you risk to spoil the whole cargo. There are compliance issues that has to be considered. This doesn't really concern the insurance side, but there are some. We are seeing loads of shipments of sensitive commodities like protection goods, like face masks or thermometers and so on. And there are some limitations currently on these for some countries and territories, on import, export, or transit. We also seen some confiscations of these items. So it's very important that you check with the full routing of these goods before you actually send them off. An important thing that I should mention before going to the final point is delay insurance, that has been talked about by some of the speakers that before me. Delay insurance is a very difficult cover. Delay insurance is a very difficult cover to obtain, also under normal times. So it's mostly related. It mostly is applied to contracts that are in place between freight forwarders and their clients, but it's very difficult to obtain one now at this critical time. So it's better if you discuss with your current provider or with us if it is available, depending on the shipment, on the contract, and on the conditions that you are going to ship your commodities. Finally, storage. As we said, goods are being stored worldwide in premises that were not supposed to be the actual premises where to store goods. So it's important to note the difference between storage in the ordinary course of transit and long-term storage. So when you have all risks insurance and a certificate of insurance that is covering a shipment, for example, from New York to Mumbai, it means that if you are storing these goods in a storage during the ordinary course of transit, the goods will still be covered by that certificate. But once the goods are delivered at the final point of storage, it then becomes a long-term storage. So most insurance certificates will not cover that storage. So it's really important that you discuss in details with your providers the difference between these two types of covers, so that you are sure that goods are covered or not. I will now go into details about some business insurance types that may be of interest for you. Of course, first of all, employees employers are interested about providing health insurance to their employees, because at these difficult times it can be seen as an important benefit for them. So some markets do offer this type of cover in the form of hospital daily benefit or recovery indemnity and some other assistance that are usually included. Please note that most insurance companies may not include coronavirus hospitalization. So it's important that you check that if this is the purpose of you buying insurance for your employees. And sometimes, for example, in European markets, you have a time deductible in place. So cover may not be active for the first 7 days. So if you have a public health sector, it may not actually be useful. So we are really hoping that in the future the market will change in order to meet customers' expectations with covers that are up to the task and up to the very complicated times that we are living now. Concerning business interruption, which is always a very felt risk from employers and from firms, again, most firms' insurance policies will not cover that. So if it's an infection diseases or pandemics, it's usually an exclusion from the cover. Some will, though. It's really very few policies that can do that, and all the extra premium that have been paid throughout the years in order to cover this will now be rewarded from these clients. We are seeing that in other markets, for example, cover against new and emerging diseases is even rarer. But again, as I say, it could be that in the future the market will change and provide some of these covers, because it's what the public is now expecting insurance to provide. So continue to check out. The market is really changing very rapidly, and so there are new products or exclusions that are being implemented or deleted from time to time. So it's important to keep up with the current updates from the market, and that's where the work of the broker can be of assistance. Travel insurance, of course, may not be considered as most vital insurance at the moment, because people are not really traveling. But of course, freight forwarders travel very much because it's part of their job. So we are seeing now a real crisis of this sector, because people have cancelled their trips, or there have been people on their trips that have been taken ill or to hospital. So there is a really huge impact of claims currently, and so we can expect that the premiums in the coming months and years will rise accordingly. So we have seen that, for example, the claims that the travel insurers are about to pay in the next for the few months of coronavirus that we have seen have already exceeded the claims that they pay for the Icelandic volcano that we had a few years ago. So this just gives you an idea of just how difficult and how heavy the situation is impacting on the travel insurance. Trip cancellation insurance has been one of the most interesting and key covers. So all those people that had trip cancellation insurance and had to cancel their trip have been able to recover a certain amount from their flight tickets or hotel expenses. So this really demonstrates the fact that it is the most expensive, but also the most useful. So also in the future, always make sure that you include this one, because in these situations when there is a pandemic or an epidemic and you have to cancel your trip, you can recover at least some of the money. The question on everyone that everyone is now asking is, would I have been covered? And it's very difficult to say. Of course, it depends on your policy. There is a very important concept of unpredictable events, which is, of course, what you buy insurance against. But since the pandemic declaration of the WHO, it wasn't unpredictable anymore, because it really means the pandemic is, of course, a global event. So there has been some changes from March 11, insurers starting to cover after that, or insurers stopping to cover after that, because before that or after that, depending on the situation. For example, we saw that for the very few weeks of coronavirus spread in China, it would have been considered a gross negligence to travel there, because you would have already known that there was an epidemic there. So depending on the insurance company, this pandemic declaration of the WHO has really changed the situation. And again, we've seen different approaches of different insurers and different markets, so it's important that you have a high quality cover, and that price in this case is really not important, but what you maybe spend more today on travel insurance is what you can retrieve in the future if you have to cancel your trip, or if you're getting hospitalized, and also assistance is also very important. If you get from an expert insurance some assistance in the difficult parts of the world is what really is important. What if I have to travel now? It's very difficult to find a cover now that covers you against coronavirus. Most insurance companies, also specialized insurance companies, have deleted their cover for infectious diseases such as this one. So it's now very difficult, I'm afraid, to obtain a travel insurance that covers you against that, because it's now a global phenomenon. But again, my suggestion is to continue to check with your providers or with us, and we are seeing continuous updates from insurers, so some switching to cover that or not cover that depending on the situation. So my suggestion is to continue to remain updated with your insurance. Cyber insurance, as a final note, this may not look like the most important risk that you have at the moment, but in fact it is, because most people are now working, most service companies at least, are now working from home. So social distancing in your work environment means smart working in this case. And technology is really helping service companies do things like we are doing now, for example, webinars, or to have conference calls with your clients or with your colleagues, emails, and so on. So there are many tools that now can help us get through the difficult situations that we have now, and to continue to be operative. Smart working is usually, depending on the legislation, an agreement between the employer and the employee that allows to agree terms of working outside the office, in this case, of course, from home. But this, of course, as I said before, it's a huge flexibility advantage. Gives you a huge flexibility advantage, but it can also become a threat because of today's cyber risk that you have now. So, for example, you can lose your private data, or there can be violation and hacking attack, violations of safety systems, after which, of course, business interruptions follows. So if you do not use properly the tools that you have, it can be you can be susceptible to some of these risks. So flexibility can then become a real threat in this case. So it is important that you, as an employer, provide your employees with proper procedures, with detailed procedures on what they have to do and how they have to work from home. So by limiting access, or to provide them with a business laptop or computer, so not using their own private ones. The fact that they have to only do business-related activity and not their own private activities. The fact that you should encrypt data in order to protect the content of the computer and of your correspondence. The fact that you should use VPN connection with safe protocols, and data loss protection procedures. So these are just a few suggestions for you, but of course you should consult with your IT experts, and they will be in a position to provide you with proper suggestion on how you should implement smart working in your working environment. After you've done that, there is cyber insurance. So what it does, it provides cover against some very practical and tangible risks. So it may not be as virtual as you could think. So, for example, it has third-party liability. It can cover your defense costs, or fines and penalties of any kind, or also the cost for handling and managing a crisis. So once you have, for example, sustained a cyber attack. So notification expenses, because you have to notify your clients that their data may have been breached, forensic expenses, the expenses that you have to pay to IT companies to have your systems back to where they were before the attack, or, for example, reputational damage that has to be, of course, corrected after that, and business interruption in general, plus extortion in some cases, so it's also very useful. So there are really plenty of different conditions under cyber insurance, and in these difficult times, it is something that if you haven't already done, it's maybe time to consider this kind of work, because now all of your assets are not in your office but are virtual from your computer, your servers, your websites, and so on. So it's really key that you are properly covered against that. So this was just a few slides to show you what we think are current risks in these difficult times, and of course we are open to get back to you with your more detailed questions. And I will now leave word to another lawyer from the United States that will provide to you some information on the US system.
Good morning. My name is Alexis Crump, and I'm with Lewis Brisbois, Bisgard & Smith. We are a nationwide firm in the United States. We have offices in 40 states and cover all jurisdictions. My practice focuses primarily on mergers and acquisitions and finance and general corporate work. I am the co-chair of our commercial lending practice and the vice chair of our corporate practice. We've seen some interesting, we've had an interesting 6 weeks in the United States. Pre-March, the logistics and carrier industries were generally in very good shape. The first weeks of March, even when we started the stay-in-place orders, the market still went up. There was still additional shipping. The truckload volume increased, and mainly that was because of e-commerce, the home deliveries and groceries and household supplies. Since that time, obviously, we've had a substantial reversal of that. Our shipments have declined about 9.2%, and some carriers have just stopped completely. We found that, of course, we're seeing commercial packaged goods and e-commerce and groceries, and some of those items are still in the process of growth at this point, because there's a new market for stay-at-home goods, and then there's an increased market for pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. We have during the course, we've kept our ports open. So we've had a few issues, but no major closures. Our Port of Los Angeles is operating at about 80% capacity and 80% of its normal volume. In the end, what we're looking at, the predictors are telling us is that the U.S. economy after the COVID-19 has run its course, we're probably looking at about $5 to $8 trillion in losses. So we just like all of the other countries will have a lot to figure out as we go forward. What are the major issues facing shippers, warehousers, and carriers at this point? We have seen about seven major issues that have come up recently. We have been managing, our clients have been managing COVID-19 laws in various jurisdictions throughout the United States. We're also working on policies and procedures, new policies and procedures to keep employees safe, especially in the logistics industries. Contract renegotiation. In some cases, there are people who or entities that are not paying or refusing to pay, or trying to negotiate additional terms, more time to send monies. We're also we're looking at force majeure provisions. There are a number of, in all aspects, and including the logistics industry, but most of our clients have asked us about their force majeure provisions in their contracts. And then business interruption insurance. Most business interruption insurance covers physical destruction, and but there are riders for sometimes bacteria or mold. And then there are additional riders on some policies for supply chain disruption coverage. So we've been looking at those issues as well. And then we've been analyzing employment issues, whether there are civil rights violations for taking temperatures before someone enters the premises, how we report the issues to the federal government and state governments, and also general confidentiality under state and federal law. And then finally, access to money. We have a pretty substantial stimulus package that was passed. It's about a $500 billion stimulus package. And we're working on, Congress is working on another package at this point. And that's a question that many of our larger, we represent Fortune 500 companies, as well as some all the way to small startups and anywhere in the mid-market as well. And that's a question that we've gotten most is how can I get some of the stimulus that is available. So going back to the first point, managing the laws of the different jurisdictions. Early in March, when the stay-in-place order went in place, there were federal laws, state laws, county laws, and city laws that a carrier would have to abide by. So if a carrier is traveling through a jurisdiction, 1 mile later, it could be in another jurisdiction, another local jurisdiction, and would have to follow those local laws. The key to our laws at this point, the stay-in-place laws, are essential businesses. Essential businesses can continue to transact business, but under certain circumstances. So for example, in one state, you have to wear, in California actually, which is where I am located, Los Angeles County in particular, we have to wear masks when we leave the house. Whereas in other jurisdictions, that's not the case. And some jurisdictions are requiring gloves. So when carriers are going throughout the country, they are having to manage the laws for their truckers. Also, we've found that in the trucking industry in particular, the rest stops are closed, the restaurants are closed. So there's no place for these truckers to sleep or to stop and get any kind of, go to the restroom, to eat. And so our clients are managing that as well. They're also competing with our government, with our state and federal government, to purchase masks and gloves. And last, they're just trying to figure out what the new dynamic is for their company as they're going forward. So all of this is affecting our commerce and causing delays. Policies and procedures for protecting workers. Our clients have been faced with drop-off destination issues, the destination receiver not willing to touch the bill of lading or counter inspect the product. So what we've been working on for the last 4 to 6 weeks is a number of mutual waiver agreements and modification agreements so that we can, so that product can be delivered with no wet signatures on the bill of lading. Invoices can be emailed. Also working on what the distancing requirements will be. We're trying, many of our social distancing requirement is 6 feet. So trying to space the docks 6 feet at origin and delivery. And then of course, disclosure of healthcare issues. So we have employee privacy issues, but at the same time, we're trying to determine how our clients can take temperatures and determine if there are people who are in the workforce that shouldn't be there. And we have been navigating with our clients those very delicate issues to make sure that that we follow the fairness laws under our employment laws. And then our clients have been faced with just managing a remote workload, 1,000+ employees at firms who are trying to figure out how those who work at home will do that effectively. And then, of course, those who have to be in the office are in a safe work environment. one of the other issues we've been faced with, as I said, force majeure clauses. So force majeure clauses are in many of the logistics agreements, but force majeure clauses in the United States run the gamut. There are simple clauses that simply state that a force majeure event is an act of God, and then others that are more specific that state governmental orders are included, pandemics, epidemics, and transportation slowdowns. So navigating the provisions has been very, very enlightening as to how we've actually found that our drafting is such that we drafted more onerously for one side and less on the other side, and so depending on where we are at the particular time, we see who's been most effective, what drafting has been most effective. Things to consider with force majeure provisions when you're looking at those. How long is the force majeure event? So for example, there are clauses that state that the force majeure event will only be for the period in which the incident has occurred, and plus 60 days. So that's also something to focus on when you're looking at those agreements. And then the notice periods. When did the notice start? So did it start when we first heard about the pandemic? Did it start when we got the federal order? Or did it start when we got the local order? So those are additional things that are at the forefront. Access to the stimulus package. As I said, $5 billion, there's been a $5 billion package that's been passed, and of that money, approximately $4 billion has been allocated to air cargo carriers. So there are the monies are for a 5-year period. There you must keep your employees in the workforce for at least 90% of your employees in the workforce, and no distributions can be paid to until the monies are paid back. We're also seeing well, let me talk about one other plan. So another bill that was passed is the payment protection program, and that's for smaller businesses, and the hope is that our smaller carriers and other smaller businesses will be able to continue operating. So the payment protection plan is for pay for up to $10 million or 2.5 times the employer's monthly costs, and the hope is that as I said, the smaller carriers, the smaller logistics providers will be able to continue during this time and continue paying their employees. Where are we as far as our regulations of import-export operations? We're in an interesting place. Usually the federal government steps in and there's a national plan, and the local governments essentially follow our federal government. But in this case, that hasn't happened. And the local governments and the state governments have really been taking the lead and making orders and new laws in order to attempt to manage some of the issues that we've been faced with. The Federal Maritime Commission created a task force that was created on March 31st to monitor transportation and vessels and logistics. At this point, nothing has happened with that. It was created, but we haven't seen anything. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection bulletins, they're regularly released, and you can find them on the U.S. Customs and Border Protection website. They're essentially what the most recent bulletin, they are suggesting and or requesting that all carriers and vessels and logistics providers use the automated system. So in order to keep distancing, they're suggesting that the automated system be used, which is of course where we're all going at this point. There have been restrictions on exports of medical supplies. It's the law's been going back and forth, so it's really not. It varies from day to day. Some of our West Coast terminals have been taking time to disinfect the facilities prior to having other vessels come in, and that has been causing some delays. We've seen there have been some issues with shippers and the time that they have the detention and demurrage costs, and so that's something that that is in the forefront as well. That's probably the detention and demurrage costs are probably going to increase as there are more vessels that are going to have to be disinfected. What should freight forwarders know when doing business in the United States? I think the keys are the force majeure clauses. Know the industry players. Many are not paying. There are some shady characters who are getting into the markets. And make sure that the liquidated damages provisions that are up on what your liquidated damages are, and any additional cost for mobilizing and for demobilizing, and then your business interruption claims, as was discussed prior, that's essentially where we are, and hopefully we'll have some better news. We're in the heart of it now. It's starting to really heat up in the United States. So grazie, ci sentiamo a presto, and I'll pass it on to our next speaker.
Hello again. Just one thing, we have received one question, and I will now reply to that. If any one of you has an additional question, it is the best moment to do so. So you have the sidebar for question and answers. Please feel free to send your question to any of our speakers, and we'll make sure to have a reply for you. So the question concerned whether there is any possibility from an insurance point of view to insure an event against coronavirus should it be cancelled. Of course, this is in most situations this is not possible. Some of you may have read the case of the Wimbledon tennis tournament that had the possibility to they bought for several years a pandemic insurance. So in this case, they've been lucky enough to get back some of the money or all of the money. No, of course, we don't know the actual policy itself, but they will be able to recover some part of their money for this huge global event that was due to take place in the United Kingdom. So this means that this cover is theoretically possible. Some huge event can do that. I'm thinking about, I don't know, the Olympics or Formula 1 or other large events. It is more difficult to obtain, of course, given the amounts and the premiums for smaller companies. So in our experience, it's going to be and remain a standard exclusion under most policies. But of course, we can always have a look at how the market evolves and how specialty markets evolves, for example, on the Lloyd's market or elsewhere in the world, if this type of cover will be developed as in the future. As I said before, the market is under really is being developed as we speak. with new products or with former products being deleted, so or retired from the market. So it really changes from one week to another, as and of course, hopefully, as we recover slowly from the situation in the coming months, it may be possible that this cover will become available to corporate markets. And that's, of course, what we hope in the future, because this is what people are expecting insurers to assist them with. On the legal side of the question, I will now have Giacomo reply to you on the same question.
Yes, thank you, Matteo. The question on the legal standpoint was about a company that paid a sum to participate to an event here in October that will be probably postponed, and they are asking whether they can be refunded because of the presence of a force majeure in that case. Well, there are a great number of alternatives in this case. Let's assume that this case and the contract is regulated by the Italian law. As I said before, the force majeure under Italian law shall be investigated in the concrete case to see whether it applies or not. So we shall see which are the reasons why the event shall be postponed, whether if there are just too few participants or if the government is canceling it. Then we should say, for example, whether the amount was paid as deposit or price, since the discipline is different for the nature of the payment. And again, we shall see whether the postponement would grant this company to join the event anyway later on. So it would be not an impossibility, an absolute impossibility, but just a temporary impossibility, and such amount will not be lost if you could participate to the postponement of the event. So as you can see, a lot of alternatives shall be investigated before saying whether a force majeure could be applied under Italian law or not. So please, we invite you to invite the person that made us the question to send us his contact and more details on the case, so that we can reply to his question. Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, I will leave Sophie to close the webinar.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I would just like to thank all of you, LCA, of course, MPL, Care Insurance, and Giacomo, Kevin, Luana, Alexis, and Matteo. Thank you so much for attending this very interesting webinar. I'm sure that all of you have maybe understood a bit well what is the problem. And if you have any other questions, please let me know, write to me directly, and I will send you the direct contacts of your interest. And I would just conclude on saying, take care, be strong, and be safe. Thank you to all.